Good evening po sa ating lahat. To those who are watching this live here in Facebook or uh, StreamYard, magandang gabi po coming from Washington, D.C. Uh, Glad that you could join us. Those who are watching us live, thank you po for continuously watching with us here in Kapua. And those who will watch this live later on or watch this as a playback later on, we really appreciate you watching this whole video. And later on, you can also get your own certificate through the Cultura code that will be given towards the end of our program. And I would like to invite here on screen my partner in crime here in Kapua. Hold on a second. Let me just. Uh, Geez, we haven't been online for a while, Ma'am Andre, kaya medyo uh,
Yes po.
kinakalawang ako sa pag-manipulate ng StreamYard. Hello po, Ma'am Andre. How are you? Alam niyo dito sa sa Washington DC, very humid. Very humid. Ang init po dito, parang Pilipinas yung pakiramdam. Diyan sa Iloilo po, kumusta diyan?
Ano po, hindi masyadong mainit, makulimlim ka especially tuwing hapon at umuulan paminsan-minsan. Pero yung nakakatakot po yung brownout. Kasi
Oh,
I experienced yesterday or 2 days ago, 6 to 6 brownout.
oh, when I
Wala,
was doing when I was doing that
yes po,
lecture in with the Trimex.
yes po, Trimester College. Brownout po for the whole day at walang signal po yung smart. Ewan ko bakit. Even though brownout, pwede namang mag-data, pero
Oh.
wala talagang data kasi walang signal yung smart at saka globe. So, at least ngayon, I hope hindi ako malalaglag dito sa StreamYard at hindi mag-brown out kasi I miss po mga kakultura, mga kapwa ko guro, I missed you a lot kasi matagal na po kaming hindi nagla-live sa kultura pero starting this time po, I think settled na po lahat. We
Uh-huh.
can
Yes,
start the
that's right.
programs of kapwa in succeeding months till the end of the
Mm-hmm.
year, till next year,
Yeah.
until we will present to you important lectures of invited writers. So, ngayong araw, privilege po ako na napaunlakan po tayo dito sa Kultura Kapwa ng aking in-invite na guest. Siya po ay teacher ko po nung college at he earned his PhD po in Philippine Studies, Anthropology from the Tri-College program of the University of the Philippines, Diliman in 2009. He holds an MA in Political Science from U.P Diliman in 1992 and a BA in Political Science and History double major from U.P Visayas in 1986. His current research interest is in the anthropology of contemporary migration, anthropology of education, Philippine history and culture, as well as citizenship and civic education. He has published articles in scholarly and peer-reviewed journals, and he's consistently presented academic papers in both local and international conferences. Our guest had a long academic career serving various institutions in different capacities. He is presently a faculty member of the Division of Professional Education, College of Arts and Sciences, University of the Philippines, Visayas. Before 2022, he was a faculty member of the Division of Curriculum and Instruction, Educational Foundations, College of Education, University of the Philippines, Diliman, where he taught courses in anthropology and sociology of education. Prior to joining UP Diliman in 2017, our guest was a faculty member at the University of Asia and the Pacific, where he taught courses in Philippine history and culture, Southeast Asian history and social science research, political theory, and political dynamics. He is the current president of the Philippine Studies Association and served as the board of the Anthropological Association of the Philippines, ugnayang pang-agham tao, ugat, until 2016. As a practicing ethnographer, he actively works in the Philippine Social Science Council in providing trainings in qualitative research methods to the academic staff of various educational institutions. He also sits in the editorial advisory board of Filipinas Journal of the Philippine Studies Association Incorporated. Our guest is currently the Chancellor of UP of the University of the Philippines, Visayas. Mga kapwa ko guro, mga kapwa manunood, mga kakultura, let us welcome to Kapwa, to Kolekteраtura, my very own professor, my unforgettable teacher in UP Visayas, Dr. Clement Camposano. Makulturang umaga po, Sir Clem. Salamat
Ah,
talaga.
Hello po, sir. Thank you po. Pinanganakan niyo po kami.
magandang umaga naman sa inyong dalawa, Andre, and ano ka bang first name? Ang nickname mo, River Boy.
Yes. It's Alan Kamba po. Alan. But they
Alan,
pronounce, yeah, Alan. They pronounce
Alan,
it here in Washington D.C. as Alan po because
Alan.
I told them my grandparents that's how they call me. So that's how they call me here in D.C.
Sige. So magandang umaga sa inyong dalawa. Magandang umaga naman sa mga tagapanood, mga kapwa nating teacher, kapwa guro, at siyempre, kapwa Pilipino.
Yes. Opo. And I cannot wait po. Actually, even when we were talking about this kwan po, yung topic po ninyo sa briefing po natin, talagang I got excited. Lalo na nakita ko yung picture po ni, of course, Jose Rizal po sa book po ninyo. Because I'm very interested with his life and who his works. As someone that kind of like also taught in the Philippines about the life and works of Rizal, it kind of well, I need to learn more. I need to learn more about it. And I think your book is basically it would answer my questions po because your book kind of adds more to the life and works of Rizal. Yeah, I
And
have a feeling that's how it is.
for the info of everyone po, June 19 soon is the birthday of Dr. Jose Rizal. So that's why
Yes.
soon po ang
Nice. Perfect
nilalagay ko
timing.
na
Ano po?
lecture ni Sir Clem.
Tsaka kakatapos lang din, no, ng araw ng kalayaan, di ba?
Yes po.
Yes.
12,
Yes.
Oh.
and Rizal has many things, rather difficult things to say about independence.
Yes.
Uh,
About the independence, yeah.
kung ating siseryosohin, medyo may, ano yun, no? Parang kunting sampal sa mukha, di ba? Gaya ng
Yes.
sinabi niya, di
Opo.
ba? Anuin mo, what good is independence if the slaves today become the tyrants tomorrow? No? So,
Tomorrow, yes. Opo.
mukhang prophetic yata, di ba?
Oh, his words are very prophetic at many times if you're looking at it po. Opo. I can't wait to hear your presentation po, sir. Yeah.
Sige. Game.
Okay.
Uh,
Game. I'm gonna go ahead
okay.
and start the slide right there. Okay, it started
Okay.
already. All
Okay.
right, and then I'm just gonna remove me and Ma'am Andre for now here on screen, and then we'll give you the floor po.
All right. Okay. Salamat. Yung lecture natin ngayong umaga depende siguro kung saan kayo, no? But of course, if you're in the Philippines, umaga ngayon, uh, 11:20 in the morning, tanghali, at kung kayo po ay siyempre nasa Amerika, gabi na, no? Ang pamagat po, no, ng lecture ay Unus, instar, omnium, no? The meaning of Rizal's La Liga Filipina. Yung salitang Latin na yan, nanggaling yan sa statutes, no? Sa konstitusyon ng La Liga Filipina. Yan ang motto ng La Liga Filipina na pinili ni Rizal. Ang ibig ko sabihin ng Unus, instar, omnium is one is worth all. Ang isa ay ang isa ay parang bahagi ng marami, no? The individual should be valued as part of the whole. Okay. Malalim mong kahulugan 'yan at ang ating lecture po ay tungkol po dito, no? Unus instar omnium. Okay. Dahil ito po yung sa tingin ko naman po ay parang encapsulates the meaning of Rizal's La Liga Filipina. Sige, umpisa na natin, ano? First slide please. Ayan, yan po ang original na dokumento, no? Na ginawa ni Rizal at ito po ay kaniyang inilahad nung kakabalik lang niya mula sa Espanya, no? When he arrived in the Philippines in 1892, no? For the last time actually. Actually no, not for the last time kasi nga pagkatapos nito kasi siya ay uhulihin at ipatapon sa dapitan at pagkabalik ko niya, pag-aliso niya doon at umaasa naman siya ay binigyan ng permiso upang pumunta ng Cuba ay siya naman ay inaresto at pinadala sa Espanya at binalik sa Pilipinas. So this is actually the second to the last time na siya ay dumating ng Pilipinas. Pero ito yung dokumento na dala-dala niya at ito ay inilahad, no? This was presented to many ilustrados in 1892, a week after he arrived in the Philippines. So, ang nakasabi dito ay Estatuto de la Liga Filipina adoptado para la pronta consecución de los fines propuestos, 1892. Okay? La Liga Filipina, the Philippine League, statutes of the Philippine League, no, adoptado para la pronta consecución de las fines propuestos o de los fines propuestos. Ibig sabihin po ay adopted for the early realization of our purposes. Okay. Yan ibig sabihin po niyon, no? Adopted for the early or the prompt accomplishment or a prompt prompt implementation or realization of our objectives, of our proposed objectives. Okay? Sige po, next slide. Yun. Isa sa mga problema natin, no, sa pagbasa kay Rizal, no? Sa tingin ko po, no? Yung palagi tayong naghahanap ng isang unified Rizal, no? We're constantly in search of that, no? Para may assumption tayo na si Rizal ay iisa ang sinabi mula ng kanyang pagkabata, no? Meron pa nga nagsasabi na siya ay halos pinanganak na nationalist, no? Siyempre hindi naman totoo 'yun, di ba? Wala naman taong pinapanganak na nationalist, di ba? Yung pananaw, yung paniniwala, lahat naman yan ay nakukuha natin sa ating paglaki, no? Pero yun nga, no? There is this reading of Rizal that is obsessed with really presenting a unified Rizal. So unified that even when he was still young, he was already painted as a nationalist. In fact, madalas nga sabihin sa amin noon, kami pa yung mga high school students, na ang dahilan daw ng pagpunta ni Rizal sa Espanya ay upang ipaglaban pa daw niya, upang magkaroon siya ng mas malayang pagkakataon na ipaglaban ang kalayaan ng Pilipinas. Hindi po totoo yun. Dahil nung umalis si Rizal, ay hindi pa nga malinaw sa kanya din kung ano yung totoong dahilan kung bakit siya pupunta ng Espanya, no? Parang meron siyang naiisip, may ambisyon din siya, pero hindi siya ganun ka desidido, no? Hindi ganun kalinaw, no? And that is really something that should be expected of young people, no? Di po ba pag tayo ay pumapasok ng kolehiyo, minsan hindi rin naman malinaw sa atin kung ano maging kurso natin, di ba? O ano yung buhay na gusto natin. Meron tayong ideya, pero hindi naman ibig sabihin na talagang firmed up na yon, no? Na yun talaga, no? At nagbabago po yon, no? Ganun na rin si Rizal, no? Hindi ho naiiba si Rizal sa atin, no? Pero may mga sociological reasons naman. May historical and sociological reasons kung bakit Espanya ang pinupuntarya ng kanyang ang naging puntarya, ang naging direksyon ng kanyang buhay. No? Ito dahil ay Pilipinas ay siyempre bahagi ng imperyo ng Espanya at ang lahat ng mga may kaya noon na nakapag-aral at gusto pang mag-aral muli ay talagang inaambisyon na pumunta sa Espanya at doon magtapos. Kasi nga ang Espanya noon ang tinitingala na bilang parang ano yun, parang destinasyon, no? ng isang taong naghahangad na umangat sa buhay at umangat sa kaalaman. Okay? Anyway, so there is this obsession with the unified Rizal, no? At itong unified Rizal na ito ay ang image ni Rizal dito ay isang liberal nationalist. No? Okay. So this gives birth to a liberal nationalist reading of Rizal. No? So Rizal was a nationalist, but at the same time, he was liberal. No? Ibig sabihin, politically, he is committed to the protection and to the promotion of individual freedoms. Individual freedoms and individual rights. Okay? At totoo, naging malaking bahagi sa buhay ni Rizal ang ganong klaseng commitment. No? Pero ang sinasabi ko ngayon in the course of his life, Rizal's beliefs also changed. His ideas also changed. And if we are to pursue this unified reading of Rizal, magkakaproblema tayo dahil maraming sinabi si Rizal pagkatapos nitong yugto ng kanyang buhay na hindi tugma doon sa liberal nationalist reading na yan. Ano? Okay? At any rate, itong liberal nationalist reading or interpretation of Rizal, ang madalas ginagawang dahilan o explanation ng ating mga authors, no, doon sa kanyang naging problematic kong attitude, no, o paniniwala tungo sa revolusyon, no, lalo na sa revolusyon ni Andres Bonifacio, no? Kasi parang lumalabas na parang hindi fully supportive si Rizal doon sa revolusyon at may mga problema siya, no? May mga tanong siya na may mga issue siyang pinapalabas noon na parang nagsasabi na hindi solusyon ang revolusyon, no? So itong ambivalence, ano, yung hindi pagkatiyak ng kanyang attitude, ng kanyang pananaw sa revolusyon ay madalas pinapaliwanag ng mga author na hindi dahil liberal di ba? Gusto nga na lumaya ang Pilipinas, pero ang problema naman gusto naman niyang mangingibabaw ang individual freedoms at baka yun ang unang maging biktima kung magkaroon ng revolusyon. So kaya ganun na lamang na parang ambivalent siya, no? Okay, walang katiyakan. Kumbaga parang ano siya, alanganin ang kanyang pananaw, no? Paniniwala. Meron naman yung mga author na medyo makakaliwa, ang sinasabi ay kasi nga burgis, di ba? At yung kanyang pagiging liberal ay bahagi ng kanyang pagiging burgis. Kasi ang mga miyembro ng ganitong uri sa lipunan ay may kaya, no? May mga ari-arian. At siyempre, iyon ay ang isang instrumento upang bigyang proteksyon yung ari-arian na yan. Ay siyempre, yung tinatawag nating individual rights and freedoms. Yung liberal na pananaw. At sa tingin itong mga author na ito ay yon sa ugat po nung ganong pagiging alanganin ng pananaw ni Rizal ay yung kanyang pagiging miyembro ng burgesya, pagiging burgis. Kasi nga, di ba, maraming pwedeng mawala sa kanyang pamilya. Okay? Si Guerrero naman, no, siya yung nagsulat nung isa sa pinakasikat na textbook sa buhay at mga sinulat ni Rizal. No? Ang pamagat po doon ay The First Filipino. First published 1961. Ang sabi niya, si Rizal ay isang reluctant revolutionary naging revolusyonaryo din daw sa bandang huli, pero parang sapilitan. Okay, parang sapilitan, parang nahila o natangay lamang ng agos ng kasaysayan. Okay. Meron namang bagong sumulat na magbagong author, isa kong actually kaibigan, si Leloy Claudio, sumulat noong 2019, sabi niya, liberalism was the overarching lens through which Rizal viewed politics. No? So, pinagpatuloy ni Leloy itong pananaw na si Rizal ay isang liberal, no? Liberal nationalist, no? At ang liberalismo, itong paniniwala sa individual na mga kalayaan at karapatan ay siyang naging pangunahing lente, okay? Upang na ginamit ni Rizal upang unawain ang politika, no? Upang bigyan saysay ang politika. Okay. Pero siyempre, alam natin, di ba? Hindi nagtapos doon sa mga liberal ideas ang buhay ni Rizal, dahil kung ang no limit tangere ay doon mo makikita yung pinakasukdulan ng kanyang pagiging liberal, at yun ay nagbunga sa kanyang talagang matinding galit sa mga praile, no? Ito naman ay sinundan ng isang nobela, no? El Filibusterismo, no? At makikita mo sa El Filibusterismo na yung ending ay medyo problematic. Medyo problematic kasi si Ibarra, na siya naging Simon, ay namatay. At merong mahabang dialogo doon, no? Sinasabi mismo ni Padre Florentino, kausap ni Simon, na hindi ka magtatagumpay. Hindi magtatagumpay ang revolusyon. Dahil hindi pa handa ang mga tao sa revolusyon. The glory of saving a country doesn't belong to one who contributes to its ruin. At aanuin mo ang kalayaan na inaasam-asam ng iyong revolusyon. Aanuin mo ang independensyang yan kung ang mga alipin ngayon ay siya ang magiging mga diktador. Siyang maghahari sa kinabukasan. What good is independence if the slaves today will become the tyrants tomorrow? Huh? So, itong nobelang ito, yung El Filibusterismo, ay talagang naging problema ito sa mga author na desidido na bigyan ng liberal na hugis si Rizal. Dahil marami sa mga sinasabi ni Rizal dito ay parang hindi tugma doon sa paniniwala na sa bandang huli ay magtatagumpay ang malayang kaisipan at ang kalayaan. Hindi nga nagtagumpay dahil namatay si Simon, no? At ang sinasabi nga dito ng ilang mga author ay, lalo na itong si Leloy, sabi niya, ang El Filibusterismo is an intentionally ambiguous novel. Parang sadyang hindi nilinaw ni Rizal, no? Ang gusto niyang sabihin. Parang ganon, ano? Or sadyang hindi malinaw yung nobela, no? Okay. Nonetheless, ang sinasabi nila, hindi lang si Leloy, pati na rin yung ibang mga author, ay Rizal was a complex thinker who availed of multiple lenses. So, komplikadong tao si Rizal at hindi ho natin dapat gawing simple, no, ang kanyang mga ideas. We should not be simplistic about Rizal, no? He is many things to many people. He availed of multiple lenses, no? Yun ang sinasabi. Komplikadong tao at komplikado ang kanyang mga ideya. Okay, next slide. Itong pagiging komplikado ni Rizal, ito yung gusto kong bigyan diin. No? Pero ang aking mungkahi ay huwag tayong magtapos doon sa pagsabi na komplikado si Rizal. No? Gamitin natin yon, yung pagiging komplikadong yon, bilang point of entry, no, sa ating analysis upang palalimin lalo yung ating kaalaman. kay Rizal. No? Let me begin by comparing the two novels of Rizal. The Noli, which was published in 1887 sa I think sa Germany, if I'm not mistaken. At ang Philip, El Filibusterismo, published 1891, which was published in Ghent, in Belgium. Ang pagkakaiba ng Philly at Noli ay napakahalaga. At kadalasan, ito po ay isinasantabi lang ng mga nagtuturo ng buhay at mga sinulat ni Rizal. No? Kadalasan, ang sinasabi lang natin, hindi, the Philly is the continuation of the Noli. Totoo nga naman, kasi ngayong mga karakter sa Noli ay nagpatuloy naman doon sa Philly. No? Pero malaki yung pagkakaiba ng dalawang nobela. Kung sa Noli, ang pinaka-kontrabida doon ay ang mga praile. Sa Philly, hindi yon ang sinasabi ni Rizal. Ang sinasabi ni Rizal, the friars were no longer the real enemies. Gone was the belief in progress, represented by Piloso Potasio. Diba? And in its place, one finds the terrible words of Padre Florentino. Si Padre Florentino, yun yung huling kausap ni Simon bago siya namatay. Anong sinabi ni Padre Florentino kay Simon? Kasi si Simon nagtatanong, anong klaseng Diyos meron kayo? Anong klaseng Diyos ito? Bakit niya pagkakait sa akin ang katarungan? Gusto ko lang naman katarungan dun sa nangyari sa akin. Ang sabi ni Padre Florentino, it is a God who punishes our lack of faith, our vices, the little regard we have for dignity and civic virtues. Ibig sabihin, ang sinasabi dito ni Rizal, kung sa Noli, sinasabi ni Rizal, ang totoong kaaway ay mga praile. Dito, sinasabi ni Rizal sa Philly, ang totoong kaaway ay mga Pilipino. At totoong kaaway ng mga Pilipino ay ang kanilang mga sarili. What good is independence if the slaves today become the tyrants tomorrow? And surely they will. Sabi ni Rizal. Yun yung malaking pagkakaiba ng dalawang nobela. It's a complete turnaround. At unfortunately, sa ating pagtuturo ng Rizal at sa ating pagbasa kay Rizal, ay madalas hindi natin pinapansin ito. Itong napakalaking pagbago sa pananaw ni Rizal. To the point that in a sense, you cannot even say that the Philly is the continuation of the Noli. In fact, what in my case, ang nakikita ko dito is parang rapture. Okay, next slide. So ang mungkahi ko, ang pinopropose ko ay huwag tayong maghanap ng isang unified Rizal. Huwag tayong maghanap ng Rizal na huwag tayong maghanap ng isang Rizal na ang buhay, ang mga bahagi ng kanyang buhay at kanyang ginawa ay nagtutugma. Huwag nating hanapin yon. Dahil siguro naman kung tayo din ang magnilay-nilay sa ating mga buhay, hindi naman lahat ng ginagawa natin nagtutugma, di ba? We become different persons over time. So, yung suggestion ko ay let us opt for a fragmentary reading of Rizal. No? Let us suspend our desire, our habitual desire for a unified reading, and instead try to focus on the fragments. Try to understand and embrace those aspects of Rizal's life that do not fit. No? At marami tayong makikita. No? Una sa lahat, pag tiningnan mo, mula Noli hanggang Philly, ay nagkaroon ng pagbabago doon sa tinatawag nating diagnosis. No? Kung ano nga ba ang problema ng lipunan. Sinasabi kasi doon sa Noli, prilocracia. No? Yung pamamayani, domination, paghahari ng mga praile sa Pilipinas. Yun ang maging problema. At kung tanggalin mo ang mga praile, abay, magkakaroon ng kasaganaan, magkaroon ng kaginhawaan, magkaroon ng tinatawag nating progress, di ba? Pag-unlad. So, problema ay prilocracia. Pagdating mo sa noli me tangere, sa el filibusterismo, wala na yung prilocracia. Ang problema ay the absence of a national sentiment. Kawalan ng pagmahal sa bayan. Na siya namang naging dahilan kung bakit hindi naging matagumpay ang simulain ni Simon. So yun, una, siguro kilalanin natin yung shift na yun, ano? Na nagbago yung diagnosis ni Rizal. From prilocracia to the absence of a national sentiment. From blaming the friars to in fact blaming the Filipinos. Okay? The Filipinos themselves. Malaki ho ang significance. Malaki ho ang malalim ang pinahihiwatig nitong ganitong pagbago, no? Pero bago tayo pumunta doon, tingnan muna natin kung paano nangyari itong rapture na sinasabi natin, no? Actually, kung titingnan mo, between the Noli and the Fili, merong ilang mga sinulat si Rizal na malinaw nang naglalahad ng ganong pagkambyo ng direksyon, no? Sa La Solidaridad, merong sinulat si Rizal na isang essay. Ang pamagat ay The Philippines Within a Century. No? Serialized September 1889 hanggang February 1890. Okay. Itong Philippines Within a Century, this is a very hopeful essay on the work of progress in the Philippines. Okay. Ang pamagat nito sa Espanyol ay Filipinas dentro de 100 años. Na palagi namang mistranslate into the Philippines a century hence. Baliho yan kasi kung the Philippines a century hence, hindi para sinabi mo the Philippines pagkatapos ng 100 taon, di ba? Ang sinasabi lang naman ni Rizal is the Philippines within a century, di ba? Dentro, within a century. So pwedeng within 5 years, di ba? O within 10 years. Okay. Mahalaga ho yung ganong pamagat kasi si Rizal doon parang nagbibigay ho ng babala na pag hindi ho inayos ng mga Kastila ang kanilang polisiya sa Pilipinas, hindi ho nila mapipigilan ang paggalaw ng kasaysayan at ng pag-unlad at magkakaproblema sila dito sa Pilipinas. Okay. Pero yon ay still, makita natin very hopeful na essay yun. That progress will happen. That progress was unstoppable. Now, from July to September 1890, merong isang essay na sinulat si Rizal, serialized again in the La Solidaridad. At ang nakalagay doon, ang title ay On the Indolence of the Filipinos. No? Sobre la indolencia de los Filipinos. At dito na siya nag-umpisa maging critical. No? Wala na yung hopefulness. Okay. Ito ay sinundan pa ng isang essay na kanyang nilabas noong Disyembre 1890. Katapusan ng taong yon. Ang pamagat ay How the Philippines is Governed. No? Como se gobiernan de las Filipinas. Okay? Dito, sinasabi ni Rizal, sa last 2 essays na ito, ang problema dito ay the absence of a national sentiment. Okay. Kung dito sa Philippines Within a Century, sinasabi niya ay hindi na magpipigilan ng mga Kastila ang daloy ng kasaysayan dahil kaming mga Filipino ay nakabuo na ng pambansang identidad at kami magiging nasyon, dito sa indolence of the Filipinos at doon sa como si gobyerno, sinasabi ni Rizal, ang problema dito sa Pilipinas ay ang Pilipino ay hindi bahagi ng isang nasyon. He is a mere individual. See? So, yun ay halos kabaliktaran ng sinabi niya doon sa Philippines Within a Century. And the way I see it, this was the exact moment, I think, historically, when that shift happened. Okay? doon sa aking pagre-research, pagsisikap na maunawaan yung prosesong ito, nakita ko na malaki ang naging papel dito nung problema ni Rizal, no? Yung hidwaan sa gitna ni Rizal at yung kanyang mga kasama sa Espanya, no? Because Rizal had problems with his fellow Filipinos in Spain. Okay? Ewan ko kung alam ito ng marami, pero si Rizal was a difficult person to many of his colleagues, fellow Filipinos in Spain, because Rizal was constantly reminding them of their work. He was constantly admonishing them that they were lazy, at tinatanghali na ng gising, at kung gising man ay wala nang ginawa kundi uminom, mambabae. Sa tingin ni Rizal, nagsasayang ng oras itong mga to, no? At, dahil doon sa kanyang paulit-ulit na pangangaral, nagkaroon ng conflict between Rizal and the expatriate community. At and this actually came to a head nung pumili sila ng kanilang leader, no? At kahit sabihin man natin sa bandang huli ay si Rizal pa rin yung nahalal, that was after 6 attempts at voting. So talagang na-insulto si Rizal dahil all along he thought he was the leader, lumabas hindi pala ganoon ka solid ng kanyang support, dahil marami nga yung may ayaw sa kanya, no? At naging nahalal lamang siya nung nag-withdraw na si Del Pilar. Yon, nasaktan si Rizal doon at actually hindi siya tumagal doon sa pwestong yon at umalis siya, at yung kanyang friendship with Del Pilar actually was ended. The friendship never recovered, no? Nung si Rizal ay nasa dapitan, nagsusulatan sila papalitan sila ng sulat ni Del Pilar. Rizal was really trying to mend fences with Rizal at that point, when Rizal was already in exile in Dapitan. Sinabi naman kasi ni Del Pilar na mataas ang aking paghanga sa iyo at tinuturing pa rin naman kitang kaibigan. At sinabi rin ni Rizal na ako rin, mataas din ang paghanga ko sa iyo. Kaya masakit yung ginawa mo. Masakit yung ginawa mo dahil nagpagamit ka sa aking mga kalaban. Ang sabi pa nga niya, no? The scratches from a friend are more painful than wounds inflicted by the enemy. Yung mga kalmot na galing sa kaibigan ay mas mahapdi sa sugat na galing sa kaaway. No? The friendship never recovered. No? But interestingly, itong conflict with the Philippine expatriate community at yung nakita ni Rizal na yung pagiging fractious, pagiging disunited ng Filipino community, yung mga bangayan sa Espanya ay naging malaking salik, no? Naging malaking factor sa pagbago ng kanyang mga political ideas, no? Later on, no, i-explain ko kung bakit, no? Okay? Pero makikita natin ito, no, doon mismo sa nobela ni Rizal, no, doon sa El Filibusterismo. Kasi pag nakita niyo yung failure, yung hindi pagtagumpay ni Simon, sa bandang huli ay dahil sa personal motives, di ba? The absence of a nation. Sinabi nga ni Padre Florentino, di ba? Hindi ka magtatagumpay dahil wala ka namang ibang hinangad kundi yung personal mong benggansa, di ba? Paghiganti. Ay hindi ho yung katarungan. You're still motivated by personal reasons. You're not doing it for the nation. At I think yun yung totoong dahilan kung bakit hindi nagtagumpay si Simon. He was bent on destroying Spanish rule in the Philippines for the wrong reasons. And as far as Rizal was concerned, that kind of enterprise is a complete disaster. Kung yung gagawin lamang natin ay tanggalin lang ang mga Kastila, pero sa maling dahilan, dahil tayo ay may personal na galit o personal na interes, ang kahihinatnan po niyan ay itong sinasabi ni Padre Florentino. The slaves of today will be the tyrants of tomorrow. Because the revolution is not born of love of country. but of personal vengeance, of personal interest. And I think this is prophetic, di ba? Hindi lamang para sa Pilipinas, ngunit para din sa maraming mga bansa na dating kolonya ng mga Kastila. No? Latin America, for example. No? Diba? Nauna nga sila sa Pilipinas no? sa kanilang pagre-revolusyon at kanilang kanilang pagtagumpay laban sa mga Kastila. Pero ano namang ang nangyari sa Latin America, di ba? Puro mga diktadurya din ang sumunod sa paghahari ng mga Kastila. Okay. Next slide. Okay. Ayon sa isang historian, isa Spanish historian, Javier de Pedro, na dati namang nakatira sa Pilipinas. Ito ay sa isang libro na pamagat ay Rizal Through the Glass Darkly, na nailathala noong 2005. Sinabi ni De Pedro, by the late 1880s, the irresponsible behavior, the lack of moral fiber, and the fractiousness, ang pagkawatak-watak ng mga Pilipino sa Espanya, no? The expatriate community would cause Rizal to undergo metanoia. Metanoia is a profound change of heart due to the anticipation of total failure in the project to which he devoted his whole life. Metanoia. Like his faith in the inevitability of progress, Rizal's confidence in the reality of the nation would be undermined by the errant proclivities, mga kalokohan, okay, of his youthful colleagues. One can imagine him wrestling with an anomaly. How could he be so confident about the social and cultural fact of nationhood and not see it enacted by his well-educated compatriots? El Filibusterismo, it may be argued, was not so much a sequel to the first novel as it was a statement of a painful realization. Ano yung realization na yun? Na yung buong panahon na nandoon siya sa Espanya ay nasayang. That the time he spent in Spain fighting for individual rights was actually a waste of time because he realized that the problem was not in Spain. The problem was in the Philippines. The problem was lack of national sentiment. Kawalan ng pagmamahal sa bayan. And that is not something that you can actually solve in Spain. Okay? Kaya yan yung metanoia. No? At siguro, one of the factors that pushed Rizal to this realization was precisely the example given by many of his colleagues in Spain. No? Ito na yung pinakamatalino eh. Ito na yung galing sa mga, di ba? De buena familia sa Pilipinas. Mga matatalino ito, no? At talaga namang matatapang pag nagsalita at magagandang matatamis ang mga salita pag pinag-usapan ang kalayaan ng Pilipinas. Pero hindi mo makikita 'yon sa kanilang mga pang-araw-araw na buhay. Hindi mo makikita sa kanilang pakikitungo sa isa't isa. They were the complete opposite of their words. So sa tingin ni Rizal, mali ito. At ito yung dahilan kung bakit si Rizal ay umuwi sa Pilipinas. Dahil sa tingin niya, ang problema ay wala naman sa Spain. Wala sa Espanya. Ang problema ay nasa Pilipinas. His friends actually tried their best to stop him from coming home. Dahil alam naman nila na may talagang samang mangyayari dito kay Rizal dahil sa kanyang mga pinagsusulat. Pero si Rizal ay hindi nagpapigil at talagang tinuloy niya yung plano niya, no? Na umuwi ng Pilipinas. At alam niya yon na talagang may mangyayari sa kanya. Okay, next slide. May mga tanong na po dito pero saka ko na sasagutin, ano? Kasi yung mga susunod na mga sasabihin ko actually ay bahagi rin ng sagot ko dun sa mga tanong. Okay. So, malinaw dito, no? Mayroong shifting ideas of nation. Nag-iba yung konsepto ni Rizal ng nation. Ano bang ibig sabihin ng pagiging isang bansa? Okay. Through the failure and death of Simon and the luminous appearance of Padre Florentino in El Filibusterismo, Rizal declared a shift. From a historical community of language and culture, whose existence was affirmed by European science, he now thought of the nation as a social body defined by civic virtue. Kung dati, ang nasyonalismo ni Rizal ay nakabase doon sa ideya na ang bansa ay isang historical community defined by language and culture. Dito sa El Filibusterismo, mayroong bagong konsepto ng pagiging bansa. Sa tingin ni Rizal, hindi lamang isang historical community ang bansa. It must also be a civic community. Okay? It must be a social body defined by civic virtue. At sa tingin ko, that idea is crucial dahil yon ang magiging pangunahing basihan ng solusyon na kanyang daladala sa kanyang pag-uwi. At yung solusyon na yon ay ang La Liga Filipina. So from a community of language and culture, the nation, in Rizal's mind, eventually evolved into the nation as an ethical project. An ethical project. The nation was no longer the unfolding of history or progress. It's not something that will just happen naturally, na parang bahagi siya ng pag-unlad. Gaya nung kanyang paniniwala doon sa unang mga sinulat niya. It was now an artifact of discipline. Ito ay isang bunga o resulta ng disiplina. A moral community where people no longer, and I quote, wrap themselves up in their selfishness and praise with forced smiles the most despicable acts. Okay? Si Rizal ang nagsumulat niyan doon sa huling kabanata ng El Filibusterismo. Yun ang sinabi ni Padre Florentino kay Simon. Next slide. So, kung ganun ang problema, na kung ganun ang diagnosis ni Rizal na ang mga Pilipino naman ay hindi bumubuo ng isang bansa dahil sila ay watak-watak at makasarili at kulang sa pagmamahal sa bayan. Maling-mali yung gustong gawin ni Simon sa El Filibusterismo. Okay. Simon's enterprise was abominable in the face of what truly ailed society. Kasi, ang sabi nga ni Rizal, di ba? As long as the Filipino people do not have sufficient energy to proclaim, head held high and chest bared, the right to life in society and to guarantee it with sacrifices with their very blood, as long as we see them wrapping themselves up in their selfishness and praising with forced smiles the most despicable acts, begging with their eyes for a share of the booty, why give them independence? With or without Spain, they would be the same, and perhaps worse. What is the use of independence if the slaves of today will be the tyrants of tomorrow? And no doubt they will, because whoever submits to tyranny loves it. Masakit, no? Masakit yung sinasabi ni Rizal. Pero sinasabi talaga dito, talagang mali yung solusyon ni Simon. No? Hindi dahil mali ang revolusyon. No? Sa tingin ni Rizal, hindi mahalaga dito kung ano yung maging paraan mo Kay revolusyon man yan, kay eleksyon man yan, kung ano-ano pa. No? Hindi mahalaga yung paraan. Ang mahalagang tanong dito ay, handa ka ba na maging malaya? No? Karapat-dapat ka ba na maging malaya? Siguro, dito ko muna magsesegue ako sasagutin ko yung mga tanong tungkol dito sa retraction, malaking kontrobersya yung retraction, kasi merong nagsasabi na hindi naman si Rizal ang gumawa niyan, forgery yan, etc. Pero merong nagsasabi na totoo, hindi pa ho natin na settle yung question ng retraction. Pero marami nagsasabi na parang hindi nababagay kay Rizal yung ideyang yan, yung retraction na yan, kaya siguro peke yan, no? Siguro fake news yan. Pero kung titingnan natin dito sa bagong pananaw na ito, posible yung retraction. Bakit? Kasi ang nire-retract lang naman ni Rizal doon, yung mga sinabi niya kontra sa mga praile at sa simbahan. At that point, when he was writing that retraction, if at all he wrote that retraction, his analysis of the problem of the country has already changed. Ang sinasabi na niya nung panahon yun, problema naman ng Pilipinas ay hindi mga praile. Ang problema ng Pilipinas at ng mga Pilipino ay yung kanilang kapwa Pilipino. No? At ang kanilang mga sarili kasi sila ay duwag. Mga duwag, mga ganid, makasarili. It doesn't matter whether we're under the Spaniards or not. With or without Spain, di ba? Sabi dito, with or without Spain, they would be the same. And perhaps worse. Okay. So yun ang tugon ko no, sa mga tanong. Bakit nagkaroon ng retraction? No? If we assume that the retraction actually happened. Okay? Next slide, please. Okay. In one of his letters, when he was already preparing to come home to the Philippines. Hindi ko natin alam yung para kanino yung sulat na yun kasi it only survived in a fragment. No? Malamang kay Del Pilar din siguro yun. Para kay Del Pilar yun. Ang sinabi ni Rizal doon, the medicine must be brought near the patient. Rizal is fond of using medical terms, no? And here is like he's being the doctor. Sabi niya the medicine must be brought near the patient. Ibig sabihin niyan, ang problema wala naman sa Espanya, nasa Pilipinas. Kaya ako uuwi ng Pilipinas because I bring with me the medicine. Okay? So Rizal actually was a prisoner of the logic of el filibusterismo, no? The absence of a national sentiment. The moment he realized that in fact ang problema ay yung kawalan ng pagmamahal sa bayan, then he became a prisoner of its logic. Kasi ibig sabihin nun, wala ang solusyon sa Espanya. Ang solusyon ay sa Pilipinas. At kailangan niyang umuwi. Huh? And he has to come home despite all the risks, despite the very real possibility na merong masamang mangyari sa kanya. No? Okay. He became a prisoner of the logic of el filibusterismo. Okay. When he arrived, about barely a week, or just a week after arrival, Rizal unveiled an organization, no? Yung La Liga Filipina. No? Ano yung goals, no? Objectives ng La Liga Filipina? 4 lang po yun. No? Okay? 4. No? Sabi ni Rizal, number 1, to unite the whole archipelago into one compact, vigorous, and homogeneous body. Number 2, mutual protection in every difficult situation and need. Number 3, defense against every violence and injustice. 4, development of education, agriculture, and commerce. And 5, the study and implementation of reforms. Okay. Now, if you subject that document, yung pinakita ko kanina, yung statute ng La Liga, malinaw kung anong gusto ni Rizal mangyari doon. What he was planning to do was to make Filipinos. Dahil sa tingin niya, we are not yet a nation. We're not yet a nation defined as a civic community. We just think we are a nation, but we are actually not a nation. So Rizal's goal was to make Filipinos. And how do you go about doing that? If you look at the statutes of La Liga Filipina, there are no high-sounding ideas there. They are all made up of rules. No? But the purpose for those rules is to make Filipinos. How? By dissolving the individual into the common good. Okay? Una sa lahat, ang motto ay, one is worth all. Diba? Ang isa ay ituring na bahagi, ng kalahatan. Unus instar omnium. Duties also come before rights. Members are to obey blindly and promptly all orders, and members to be favored all the time. Those are some of the key ideas in the Liga Filipina. Kaya nga ang tanong ko, di ba, liberal pa ba ang taong ganyan? Sa tingin ko, hindi na. No? Hindi na liberal si Rizal because he was already saying that members are to obey blindly and promptly all orders. Kung may isang miyembro na nangangailangan ng tulong at hindi mo tinulungan, you must be punished severely. Kung anong nawala sa kanya, yun yung dapat mawala sa iyo. Yan ang sinasabi ni Rizal doon sa La Liga Filipina. No? It's a very disturbing document. If you're a liberal, you're going to be scared of it. No? Because what Rizal is proposing is actually not liberal at all. What he was in fact trying to do was to instill habits and dispositions through rules, through discipline, obeying blindly and punctually all orders, preferential treatment of members, etc. The goal was simple. To instill habits and dispositions hanggang sa makabuo tayo ng lipunan na kung saan ang mga miyembro ay talagang ugali na nilang mahalin ang kapwa at ugaling mahalin ang bayan. At ang mga pag-uugali ay hindi ko nakukuha sa lecture, ay hindi ko nakukuha sa pagbabasa, no? Yun po ay nakukuha sa paulit-ulit nating gawain, di ba? Through repetition, to practice, no? Parang ano yan no? Parang pag-aaral ng sumakay ng bisikleta, di ba? Kahit anong gawin mo ang pag-aaral niyan ay hindi ka matutong sumakay ng bisikleta. Now, there's only one way to ride the bicycle, no? And that is to practice riding one, to get on top of one. Okay? So next slide. Okay. Okay. I'm down to my last two slides. No? So, dito, malinaw, no? Na ang konsepto ng La Liga Filipina ay parang naging bunga ng impluensya ni Jean-Jacques Rousseau kay Rizal. No? Kumbaga kung dati sa No Limit Tangere, ang naging inspiration niya ay si Voltaire, lalo na doon sa kanyang pagiging anti-friar. Dito naman, sa El Filibusterismo, ay si Rousseau. No? Hindi lang sa El Filibusterismo, kundi pati na rin sa La Liga Filipina. No? Rousseau's social contract theory and its concept of the general will seem to have served as basis for resolving the problem of fractiousness and excessive individualism that Rizal became increasingly concerned with and which caused his estrangement from the expatriate community. No? La Liga's goal of a compact, vigorous, and homogeneous body may be compared to the goal of Rousseau's social contract, where, and I quote Rousseau, each of us puts his person and all his power in common under the supreme direction of the general will, and in our corporate capacity, we receive each member as an indivisible part of the whole. Pag binasa po nyo yan at kinumpara nyo doon sa konstitusyon ng La Liga, ay talaga nagtutugma yung dalawang, yung ideas ni Rizal at ni Rousseau. No? So, by invoking the general will, we crystallize now the meaning of La Liga Filipinas' iron discipline. This act of association creates a moral and collective body receiving from this act its unity, its common identity, its life, and its will. Okay? So yun yung gustong mangyari ni Rizal. No? Kung gamitin nating lente ngayon ang concept ng general will ni Rousseau, it seems clear that what Rizal was trying to achieve with La Liga Filipina was actually to manufacture, to create by discipline, by organizational discipline, what Rousseau called the general will. So in place of the individual wills of people, you consolidate them into a body, a single body with one general will. And yan ay magagawa lamang natin kung meron tayong organisasyon at meron tayong proseso na pagdadaanan. Okay? Next slide. Okay. So yun ang naging dahilan kung bakit sa tingin ni Rizal ang problema ng mga Pilipino ay hindi malulutas sa Espanya. At ang kaniyang panahon na tinagal doon sa Spain, no? Sa Espanya, no? Dahil siya ay namalagi doon. Ay yeah, to his mind, it was really all a waste of time. Isang pag-aaksaya lang. Dahil na-realize nga niya, di ba, na wala naman pala sa Espanya ang solusyon sa problema ng Pilipinas. Ang solusyon ay nasa Pilipinas. No? At yun ang dahilan kung bakit siya ay umuwi. No? At yun ang dahilan kung bakit he did not actually welcome revolution. No? He was prepared to support it, but to him, kung walang pagmamahal sa bayan, itong revolusyon na ito, this is going to lead to a disaster. Because then the slaves of today will become the masters, become the tyrants tomorrow. So, to him, the real solution was the creation of a civic community. And when that community is created, it doesn't matter what means you use. Okay? So, yun ang kahulugan, yun ang pinahihiwatig ng La Liga Filipina ni Jose Rizal. Maraming salamat po. Maraming salamat sa iyong pakikinig.
Sir, that was such a very nice, really great po. I see it like almost like a commentary on the life and works of Rizal, the subject, the college, yung offer po sa college, the class, the life and works of Rizal. I think definitely po your book should be added there. I have a lot of questions actually po that I've gathered. One is, yung isa po is, what got you first of all, what got you interested in studying the life and works of Rizal?
Okay. All right. Well, I've been a civic education advocate for many years now, for over a decade. When I was at the University of Asia and the Pacific, medyo interesting that doon ko pa natutunan yung civic education, no? Yung commitment to civic education, dahil I didn't pick that up from UP, no? Sa UP kasi we talk a great deal about nationalism, no? Pero I think partly because of the kind of reading of Jose Rizal that we are introduced to, no, that hindi naging matingkad sa mga taga UP yung civic education. I discovered my commitment to, I arrived at this commitment to civic education when I was at the University of Asia and the Pacific, and from that point onwards, I became an advocate. And when Dr. Dumol and I and my other colleagues were exploring models and ideas that we could use, to create modules on civic education, and we discovered Rizal. I mean, as a treasure trove of ideas, no? And then we actually realized that siguro isa sa pinakamalaking pagkakamali natin was to make Rizal a required reading. Kasi required reading, binabasa na lang for compliance. Nawala na yung... There are so many things about Rizal that we didn't bother to understand. We simply, tried to survive the course, bored to death with it. And then, sige, para lang matapos, para mag-comply tayo at makagraduate. Hindi nating natutunang basahin si Rizal for his ideas. No? And to me, that's tragic. No? Because Rizal has many things to say, and some pretty painful things to say to Filipinos today. No? Di ba, katatapos lang ng eleksyon. Di ba? Mga tao, the people are beating themselves in the chest. Bakit ganitong resulta ng ating eleksyon? Parang ayaw ko na maging Pilipino, gusto ko na lang maging Amerikano, magmamigrate na lang ako sa Canada, di ba? Etc. To me, parang mali yata, di ba? I'm not against migration. I'm, in fact, very supportive of migration, but sabi ko, we do it for the right reasons. Don't leave the country simply because the election did not go your way. No? The way I see it, parang sabi ko, kung binasa mo si Rizal, hindi ka na magugulat doon sa resulta, di ba? Kasi, di ba? We have not gotten rid of personalism. We have not gotten rid of all those problems that Rizal was actually diagnosing. So why are we surprised? Why are we surprised that our politicians are the way they are? We keep looking for, diba? When we deal with our politicians, we keep looking for personal connections. We expect them to provide for our personal needs. We expect them to be sources of patronage. And when they actually become sources of patronage, we bewail the fact that they are sources of patronage. I mean, diba? Nagre-reklamo yun, diba? Bakit may pork barrel, etc. Ba't naman kayo humihingi ng project sa congressman ninyo? Ayaw niyo naman pala ng pork barrel. Anong gagawin ni congressman? Because a congressman is really, diba, elected to make rules, to make laws. But really, the actual function of a congressman in our political culture is not to make laws. It is to bring home projects. That's how they're elected. Sino may gawa noon? And who's making that a necessity? Di mga botante din, di ba? So in a sense,
who voted for the congressman?
Precisely, I think that many of the dysfunctions of our political system is a result of our not having understood Rizal's prescriptions. So that's why I'm into this, no? And that's why hindi ako nadidismaya na ganito ang naging resulta ng eleksyon natin. Sa tingin ko, we always deserve the leaders we have, no?
Yeah. So it's very important, Paul, actually what you mentioned about because we tried to create this image of the unified Rizal for some reason, Paul. And I think that's not only about Rizal, but even to like people when they do something bad, they're completely bad person. Or when they do something good, they're completely a good person. And we kind of like make that image that, I mean, that's same everywhere, even here in the US. When they talk about Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson's very known to like have created the US Constitution, this and that, but he's a very complicated person also. He spoke against slaves, but have his own slaves.
Yes.
So it's very complicated. So that idea of unified person, like all throughout their lives, I think that's something that we need to start breaking down in our head. But for example, in Rizal po, why do you think many Filipinos or many people have that kind of create that idea of unified Rizal or person?
Yeah. I think the reason for that is because the people who wrote about Rizal initially, who introduced, I mean, in the from the time when we became independent, the people who represented Rizal to us, people who wrote about Rizal, were nationalists, and they were really bent on creating a Rizal that was that will serve as an exemplar of nationalism, no? And in the course of doing that, they had to edit that Rizal, diba? In the same way that as you said, no? Thomas Jefferson has been edited. No? I'm sure
Yes.
George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and so on. I mean, it's the same for everybody. Or even contemporary figures like Obama, no?
Yes,
or in our case, diba? In our case, diba? Ninoy Aquino, Cory Aquino, and so on. We edit them, no? Because we are in search of our own version. Diba?
Yes, we create that version of them.
Yes, kaya mahalaga ang mahalaga ang critical history as a discipline. Because if you don't have that, what you get is history as propaganda. No?
Yes, history, and we don't want that.
Yes, history as a narrative, no, as propaganda, really, as form of nation, as form of nation building, di ba? Di ba tingnan mo yung Philippine history, for example, no? You open the first chapter, like let's take a very concrete example. Let's take the case of the one of the most popular textbooks of Philippine history, the one by Agoncillo. Alam ni Andre ito eh, no?
Yes, I have that book.
The history of the Filipino people, di ba? You flip from the first, you open it from the first chapter all the way to the end. What do you see? Now, makikita mo doon, prehistoric times pa lang may mga Filipino na eh. Wala pa mga Kastila, may mga Filipino na. Paano nangyari yon? Kung ang salitang Filipino, ang katawagang Filipino, ay galing sa pangalang Felipe, di ba? The Prince of Austria, no? The Prince of Austria will later on become king. So,
yeah.
But you see that there is that linear narrative, eh. Di ba?
Yeah.
It's a linear narrative. And in the course of creating that linear narrative, there is so much editing. There is so much editing. Look at, for example, how little how sparse the treatment is of, let's say, Muslim Mindanao. Parang hindi bahagi ng Pilipinas eh. Or look at how the indigenous communities are treated in that narrative. They're marginal. So the marginalization of the indigenous peoples did not only happen today. They begin with the way knowledge is produced through the textbooks. Kasi
That is very true po.
para lang naman sila mga footnote, di ba? But to me, it's important that we interrogate the making of this narrative. Why? Because we have a ton of historical injustices to correct vis-a-vis the indigenous peoples, vis-a-vis the Muslims. No? The truth is that when we became a nation, when Rizal first talked about nation, about Filipinas, hindi tinuring ni Rizal na mga Filipino ang mga Muslims. At hindi rin niya tinuring na mga Filipino ang mga indigenous communities. He used a very specific term for them. Kung tayo mga Pilipino, ang tawag niya ay Indios. O kaya Los Indios Bravos, para yon sa mga masisigang mga Indio, para po sa mga indigenous communities, may terms na ginamit which is a product of 19th century racial science, and which term he shared with Blumentritt, and that term is what? Ang term niya doon is doon sa kanyang commentary, ang ginamit niyang term ay when he talked about los regiones independientes, no? Independent regions. Actually, he referred to them as, di ba? Mga tribus montañesas, di ba? Or Muslims, los Moros, no? He had a separate. He treated them separately. In short, they were not Filipinos the way Indios, Christianized Indios were Filipinos. See, but we shouldn't blame Rizal for that, because at that point, really, only the Christianized communities were part of the colonial structure. Even though the Spaniards were claiming the entirety of the archipelago, they had no real power in Mindanao. They had no real power in the Cordilleras. Diba? They influenced the Cordilleras. But it was not colonialism. It's what my good friend Boboy Acabado, the archaeologist, Stephen Acabado, called pericolonialism. Diba? Spanish sovereignty did not penetrate into the Cordilleras. It did not penetrate into the interior parts of the islands. That is why today, several centuries later, those indigenous communities are still there, and many of them have not been Christianized. See? So, in short, we are the way we are as a nation today is a product not only of Spanish colonialism, but a product of American colonialism, and a product of the state building and nation building efforts of the post-war years. In short, it's an historical artifact na makikita lamang natin ng mas maayos at mas malinaw kung titingnan din natin kung paano natin sinusulat yung kasaysayan. Kasi the way, for the longest time, we've denied the indigenous communities the right to self-determination. Diba? We've denied the Muslims that right. No, in fact, ang thinking noon is, pag bombay na lang natin ang bombay, at some point they will realize they're Filipinos. No? Hindi nga nangyari, di ba? Yeah. Of course, we now know better, no? After so many decades of fighting a war, we now realize, pwede naman pala siguro, kahit ano na lang. Kung pwede, political settlement na lang tayo. We end up admitting na, hindi, siguro pwede naman kayong maging Filipino. You'll just be a different kind of Filipino. No? Bangsamoro Filipino. And that's just fine. Di ba? That's fine. Rather than for us to insist that, they must submit to the same, diba? The same framework of laws, the same mode of life, the same kind of institutions. Problematic yun and our inability for so many years to see that and to simply prosecute the war in Mindanao, I think, is a result precisely of this linear narrative. No? Itong version ng Philippine history na hindi nagbibigay ng nararapat na atensyon doon sa pamumuhay, sa kultura, sa mga institusyon, sa mga gawain na makatutubo at ng mga Muslim. And we have work to do, no?
Yes, I definitely.
The way I see it,
yes,
we're building this nation. We're continue to build the nation. And ngayon nagbago pa nga lalo, di ba? And let me just point this out. The concept of nation that Rizal has inspired me is an open-ended concept. It should be open-ended on both ends, the way I see it. Open-ended as regards or towards the indigenous communities that we have to bring into and integrate into national life, with all that they can contribute to us, and it should be open-ended towards the diaspora, because the Filipinos who go to other countries don't stop being Filipinos anyway.
Yes, opo. They seek they seek their Filipino-ness actually.
Yeah.
If all the more when they are in the different country.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So it should
And
be open-ended on both ends.
I really like where you're going, Paul, because with how you've explained things, so with me, how I'm understanding it so far, you're showing a great fine line between the historians and anthropologists. Because with anthropologists, Paul, like us, I mean, for me also, this is basically historical anthropology work. Wherein we study the history itself and try to understand the society of how people create history.
Yeah.
And that is very important as far as understanding our history is, because when we create a history that is yun nga po, like what you said, is linear history. I mean, definitely there's something wrong with that, because that would, well, it's a propaganda. It's no longer a true history that we really hope for. That is why it's very important that we study it like an anthropologist, wherein we study it in a way that, okay, why is this history written like this?
Yeah.
And
Well,
what created this kind of history that we have right now.
mhm.
And those are very important questions, Paul. And as far as trying to understand who we really are, because there are many unwritten histories that we have. We have a lot of unwritten histories. So when we try to bring that out, it's not necessarily a historical revisionism,
Mhm.
but it's more of like, well, bringing out history that we've missed, or
Yeah.
history that was covered, or history that was, well, not in our history books.
Siguro
So that is, yeah,
ang term dyan is not revisionism, ito reconstruction. No? We have to reconstruct our history.
reconstruction.
There's
There
so
you
much of it.
go.
So much of it nasagasaan lang ng linear narrative na yan eh. So let's to
Yes,
recover
yes,
some
I
of it,
completely
no?
agree.
Kasi
And your work as an anthropologist, our work, I believe our work as an anthropologist are especially very important during these times, that we try to understand our histories in a way that well, it hasn't been understood before. It's very important, po, I think.
yeah. Siguro ang isang mahalagang lens na
Mhm.
pwedeng maiambag ng anthropology dito, no, sa pag-aaral ng kasaysayan, especially critical history, is that concept of culture as process, no? Kasi for the longest time, ang
Yes.
ginagamit natin ng concept ng culture is static, no? That's
Mm.
the concept that dates back to 1870s, kina Morgan and Tyler pa yon, di ba? Culture as a
Yes.
complex whole, culture as a way of life, no? Static yun eh. Kasi parang sinasabi mo na, pag sinabi mo ng Filipino culture, parang namang may iisang
Kultura
Filipino way of life, di ba?
of
Na
life.
hindi
Yes, yes, yes.
nagbabago, no? Dagdagan mo pa ng cultural essence, di ba? Kung ano-ano pang mga dinadagdag doon. To
Mm.
me, nakakasama po yun. Kasi bakit? Una pa lang, our country speaks almost 100 languages, and it used to be about more than 200 languages, no? We have so many religions, we have so many practices. How can you even say that there's only one Filipino culture? I mean, how can you use it in the
Mhm.
singular, di ba? Dapat Filipino cultures, di ba? But what more
Yes.
importantly, culture is also not only plural, it's also fluid. Nagbabago ang kultura eh. So my concept
Mhm.
of culture is really culture, yung ginamit ni Susan Wright, no, na culture is a contested process of meaning making. And the way I see it, when you write history, you are creating meaning. And I think we must constantly write and rewrite history, uh,
Yeah.
because I think the goal should be that well, number one, we have to explain the present to ourselves. We need to understand the present. And if you live in the Philippines and you live in a regular town, like I do, you realize that there's a plaza, there's a church, there's a municipio,
Mhm.
and then the further you go from the plaza, the less westernized the people are, and
Yes.
until you
Opo,
reach the
opo, opo.
mountains where you engage the indigenous communities. No? So,
The uncivilized
so-called, di ba?
society.
So,
Yeah.
but to look at that, I mean, bakit ganun? Di ba? The purpose of history is to explain that. To help us understand why is it that half a century after the coming of Magellan to the Philippines, half a century later, and there are still many parts of the Philippines that have not embraced Christianity. Why? Why is it that in Latin America, very few people, for example, in Mexico, speak Nahuatl? Very few will speak the
Yes.
indigenous languages. And in the Philippines, we still speak the language of our forefathers.
Yes.
I mean, I'm a regular Filipino and I speak 3 Philippine languages. So, why is that case? Ang pwede lang magpaliwanag niya, kasaysayan eh. Di ba? So, to me, that's the purpose. One is to explain the present, and the other two is because now you explain the present, then you can chart the future, di ba? Rather than to come under the slavery of this linear narrative, na problematic din naman. Kasi sinasabi yung linear narrative, ang kaduluduluhan yan is nation eh. Ano bang nangyari sa nation ngayon? Diba? We're starting to realize many of our problems cannot even be solved within the framework of the nation. I mean, can any one country solve the problem of global warming? Of course not, no? I mean, can any one country solve the problem of smuggling and drugs and international crime? Of course not. Not even the United States can do that. So, yung kumbaga dapat yung kasaysayan, yung pag-aaral ay dapat yung kasaysayan ay magiging magbibigay ng pagkakataon upang magtanong tayo, no, 'di ba? Upang questionin natin yung mga institusyon, yung mga pangyayari, no? We will not always have answers. But to me, the questions are good enough. No? As long as you continue
having
asking
questions are good enough.
Yeah, kasi and I would explain this to many of my students who are obviously feeling dismayed and because of the turnout of our politics. No? Sabi ko sa kanila, alam mo, the United States ended slavery in the 19th century. Huh? The black man became the equal. The African Americans became the equal of white Americans legally in 1964 or thereabouts. When did they elect the first African American president? 2010, 2009?
Yeah.
Is racism gone in the U.S.? Of course not. I mean,
of course not. Yeah, it's still there.
Take the long view, and then see that in fact it's all a process. The America of your dreams is really an artifact of history, no? And it's the same thing for Filipinos, diba? It's the same thing for us. No? We need to recover precisely yung historical agency natin, and I hope that this way of reading Rizal can really help crystallize many of the issues that affect everyday life today.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Here's
thank
a
you
question
for
the
questions. Yeah.
Yes. It's really grateful, and I hope you could entertain a couple more questions from us if you have more time.
Yeah.
Here is regarding the Rizal's metanoia po on or change of heart on nationalism. How important is it for us to see that see Rizal's metanoia or change of heart on nationalism, especially at this age?
Well, it's important because we live in a very fluid age. We live in an age defined by change, by instability, by plurality. In our own lifetime, we see people leave the Philippines and become Canadians. My sister became Canadian. My other sister is an American. I mean,
but that doesn't make them less Filipino, di po ba?
Precisely, no? Yeah. My other brother went to the U.S. Did not become an American and plans to come home next year to rejoin politics. No? So I mean, we live in a very fluid age, and I think it's important that we have people like Rizal really are not too different from us, di ba? Na ganun din, no? Nagbabago din, nagmamature din, nagkakaroon din ng bagong ideas, bagong lenses, di ba? I mean, look, if you're a scholar of Marx, I mean, and I've know many friends who are into Marxist theory, and they keep struggling over the young Marx and the mature Marx. I mean,
On
somebody, a very
capitalism, and how
systematic
his
thinker like
viewpoints.
Marx, can a systematic thinker like Marx can actually say different things at different points in his life, no? So to me, it's important that we don't fixate with the unified self, with unified
Yes.
figures. I mean, we're not unified ourselves. Why should we expect that of the people we read about, di ba?
Yeah.
Kasi sabi ko nga doon
Maybe
minsan sa
because we
mga,
only see a quote they said, and then
yeah,
we coined them in that quote, and then that's them all throughout their life,
yeah, and
which
they
is
become a
wrong.
meme. They become a meme, they become viral, di ba? Pero ito lang,
Yes.
madaling gamutin yan eh. Sasabihin ko lang doon sa mga bata, mga estudyante na mga college students, sabi ko, if you really think that you are who you are and you are who you will always be, have you ever read your high school diary?
Your slum book is a slum book. They call it
Slumbook,
slum book.
etc., di ba?
Opo.
Sabi ko, bumalik ka sa akin at sabihin mong mali ako if you don't find it cringe-worthy, di ba? So,
Yes.
ganun nga, di ba? But that happens, di ba? Life is really a journey. And culture is a journey. Culture is a process. And the
The
way I
only
see
thing
it,
constant is change.
yeah. And to me,
The only thing
it,
constant in this life is change.
yeah. And to me, importante yung origins, but origins not the only thing. The journey is just as important, and the destination is equally important.
It's
Diba?
important.
Kaya nga, di ba, meron tatanong doon kay the famous Filipino food scholar, Doreen Fernandez, no? Ang tinanong sa kanya, napakabigat na tanong. Sabi niya, how do you define, or when is a dish Filipino? Kasi nga, di ba, ang dami-daming influences, di ba? Yung pinakamamahal yung adobo, hindi mo naman pwede, obviously has colonial roots, ano? So,
yes.
So when is a dish Filipino? Napakaganda ng sagot ni Doreen Fernandez doon. You know what? The origin doesn't matter. It's the destination that counts. Are you turning it into something Filipino? Di ba? The process of indigenization is important. Ako ganon, no? Mahalaga naman siguro yung origin, no? But the origin is only one part of the equation. And I think what is more important is where are we taking this? Where are we taking the nation? Ano yung ipapamana natin sa mga anak natin, sa mga apo natin? Diba? Where are we taking Filipino cuisine, di ba? Should you always be, fixated with the essence, which you can never really hope to capture, because my God, I mean, how do you capture that? How can there be that essence? No, you can just imagine the pansit pa lang. There are many versions of it as there are regions, di ba? Pag sinabi mong masarap ang pansit canton ng mga taga Iloilo, ay magwawala yung mga taga Cagayan, di ba? Pag sinabi mong masarap ang adobo ng mga Tagalog, hindi rin tatanggapin ng mga Ilonggo yan. No? We will not surrender, we will not accept that claim. So, I mean, there are as many versions of adobo as there are regions. So why can't there be as many versions of Filipinos, di ba? So to me yun ang ano ko, ang tugon ko doon sa tanong na yun. And I think siguro yun din dapat siguro isipin ng mga Filipinos in the diaspora to stop being guilty about not being in the motherland. Alam mo yun? It's okay, it's cool to want to retrace your roots. There's nothing wrong with learning tinikling. I mean, fine. But there's also nothing wrong with learning hip-hop. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, if you come home, dito, may nag-hip-hop dito ng mga Filipino. Merong mga flip-hop battles dito, no? And they're saying, actually, this is only partly borrowed kasi mayroon namang balagtasan sa amin eh. Diba? So it's a fusion of hip-hop and balagtasan, no? It's an exciting scene. So the way I see it, ganun ang kultura, no? And it's amazing to be in that mix, to be in that mix, and hopefully tayong mga Pilipino, yung ating cosmopolitan spirit, ang ating embrace of pluralism, I think it should be an example to the rest of the world. Still fixating with identity, with rootedness, with essences, and fighting terrible wars over it, no? Di ba? Tayong mga Pilipino, cool ka lang, di ba? It doesn't matter as long as okay, saan ka man, di ba?
Yeah.
Pilipino ka pa rin, di ba? And your roots are important, but where you're going, where you're taking it, whether it means going back to the motherland or going somewhere else, to me it's just as legitimate.
Yeah, perfect po, because this next question, do you believe that Rizal's sentiments on the lack of true nationalism among Filipinos still exist today?
Oh yes, definitely. No? And by true nationalism, I mean civic virtue. No? Not just love of country, waving the flag and feeling emotional every
Yeah,
time you
yeah,
sing
yeah.
bayad ko. So, no, mababaw lang yun eh. No? Ang mahalaga dito, kaya mo bang damdamin ang isang bagay? Kaya mo bang pangalagaan ang isang bagay kahit na yung taong makikinabang noon ay hindi mo kakilala?
That is
I mean,
very good point. Yeah, yes.
di ba? There are 110 million Filipinos, di ba? We can never meet all of them. We can never know all of them. We can only engage that body through the imagination, di ba? Imagine communities nga, sabi ni Benedict Anderson eh. Imagine communities. But I think that idea can be transposed into civic engagement. Kasi katulad niyan, no? Dati nung nagfi-field work ako, maraming mga kaibigan ko abroad na mga marites din, nakikwento sa akin. Sabi nila, alam mo, dito, di ko nasabihin kung anong lugar, dito sa lugar na to, naku, ang mga tao dito, hindi sila malilinis sa katawan. Hindi sila naliligo araw-araw. Hindi katulad natin ng mga Pilipino. Kahit winter, maliligo tayo. So, sabi ko naman, oo nga, no? Ang linis natin mga Pilipino. Pero ang tanong ko lang, kung malinis nga tayo mga Pilipino, bakit ang dumi ng maraming lugar sa Pilipinas?
Filipinas, yes.
And you realize that, in fact, malinis tayo sa mga personal spaces natin. But when it comes to the sphere beyond the home, diba? When it comes to public spaces, when it comes to, that larger community of anonymous others na hindi natin kakilala, hindi natin kaano-ano, wala naman tayong pakialam. Yun ang sinasabi ni Rizal eh.
Yes.
Yun ang sinasabi niya. Diba? And it's not easy to do, diba? Paano mo mamahalin yung taong hindi mo kaano-ano? But that's precisely what you need to do if you're going to become a country, diba? If you're going to save the environment, you have to do that. Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm working as an instructor here in Washington D.C. and that's basically what we are teaching the students from coming from all over the U.S. from different states is that civic action. You should have civic action in this democratic country. Have a civic action. What are those civic actions? So that's exactly what you said. True nationalism. You can wear, people can wear a flag if they want, or like use this Filipino, they could put it in their bumper sticker, I am a proud Filipino, in their shirt, they can wear it, but that's really not the true nationalism that I think that doesn't say much about your being Filipino. That says a lot about in words, but like what you said, civic action is very important, and I think that answers this last question. One question: what to you is a true nationalism that Rizal would hope for?
Yeah,
I think it's a civic action. You've already answered
to create that civic community that he intended to create through La Liga Filipina. Because if you can just imagine our democratic system of government as hardware, you need civic virtue as a software. I mean, how can
nice
I mean, diba? We imported our institutions from the United States. We copied the presidential system of government, no? But we're making it work in a cultural context that basically does not really have the appropriate political culture. So, ano nangyari, di ba? Yung congressman mo ngayon parang dato din di ba? At maraming mga mamamayan parang alipin. See?
Yes.
Kasi nga walang civic virtue. So si congressman, feeling niya, pag-aari niya yung distrito niya, pag-aari rin niya yung mga tao. No? Yung mga tao naman, kahit meron silang mga karapatan, ang ugali nila para mga alipin, di ba? Submitting to the rule of that person. And to me, that is evidence of an absence of a civic culture. Because in the absence of a
Yes.
civic culture, the absence of civic community, what will take its place would be those things that have always been there. And the pre-Hispanic barangay culture, di ba?
Mhm.
Yung ating pre-Hispanic way of life, nandun yun. They haven't, it hasn't disappeared. It has simply
It's
evolved and
true.
been woven into our existing system of government. Di ba?
It's a different name. It's a different name, but still same
Yeah. That's why
same
that's why that's why the
fun.
politicians they go around like datus and rajas. Eh. Di ba? Ganun din.
Yeah.
So because what you have is the hardware, you forgot about the software. What Rizal was trying to do was really develop the software to make democracy
Yes.
work. And it's
Mhm.
I think in the US it's the same thing, di ba? Because the challenge is you face a multicultural society, so you have people from different cultural contexts. They need to be socialized into precisely a system. I mean, a system of values that will make
Mhm.
American institutions work. No? So that's needed, I guess. I mean,
Ang
that's so.
problema lang po dito sometimes, opo, problema lang po dito kung minsan, itatagalogin ko na po kasi baka mayroong mga nakikinig ako mga coworkers. Ah,
Ah,
Kasi opo, minsan yung mga kabataan, in-encourage nila masyado na speak out, say your voice, you have to fight for your voice, fight for your ganito, ganyan. Pero they forget to tell them that they also have responsibility when they speak out. Na
yeah,
kaya basta-basta na lang kung ano na lang yung sabi niya. I think yun ang problema sa mga kabataan ngayon. Sometimes kung they just speak out whatever, kung hindi na
mm,
nila iniisip. And that's why I always use, hindi to ginagamit dun sa where I'm teaching, but I always use Abraham Lincoln. He said, um, nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power.
yeah,
And I always tell my students that, your power is your voice. But remember that every time you use your voice, you could either make yourself or break other people, at the same time. So make sure that when you use your voice, you're, you understand that your character is tested, you
yeah,
know. So that's something that I think is very important, especially the younger individuals now, for them, that when they voice out something, that they make sure that they have to be responsible and respectful at the same
mm,
time, and wise.
yeah, yep. There's much to learn from
Opo.
Rizal, no?
Yes, much, much,
Yeah.
much, much, and learn to learn from Rizal po. Last question. I have last question. We have a question from our our viewer. Ano pong naging ambag sa buhay niyo po ang pag-aaral ng buhay o tungkol kay Dr. Jose Rizal?
Napakalaki po dahil dito ko nakita yung mission ko sa buhay, ano, bilang guro, no?
Mm.
Ah, yeah, to me, it reading Rizal has really clarified for me the contribution that uh, I can make and I can continue to make in making democracy work in the Philippines. Um, so yun, no? Naging malinaw sa akin yung mission ko, no? Yung trabaho ko, yung pwede kong iambag, no, sa lipunan, no? Yun siguro ang sagot ko doon, no? Parang napaka simple lang, no, doon sa pabigat din yung tanong, pero
Oo.
actually, well, but that's how I would choose to frame it, no. Uh, at lalong naging mas mahalaga yan ngayon dahil I am now in charge of running a university as chancellor of the UP Visayas.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not a small institution. I mean, we have many campuses. We play a critical role in the development of our different regions, and as and in that context, to me, Rizal it really it's like my north star in that sense. It provides me
Yes.
that bearing, no? that guidance.
Mm.
Uh, so
Guidance to
it allows
Bethlehem.
me to find my bearings. Yeah.
Yes. What would you advise po? For example, for a person like me, because I've always wanted to, well, um, I've just recently finished my master's degree, but I've always continued to hope for to go back in the Philippines and really well, also bago pa man ako, before I practice abroad and learn about other countries, which I feel bad that I'm doing right now because I want to do it in my own country.
Mhm.
That's why I was so happy when I was teaching there in LBC, but I had to return here. What's your advice to, for example, individual like me who wants to go home to the Philippines to try to practice and try to, well, even uh, go with your kwanpo, with uh, what you are promoting with the democracy in the Philippines, and try to help out in
Mhm.
that work? What would you advise to individual like me?
Well, I think it's important, for first of all, I would recommend that precisely, for Filipinos abroad to also visit and to engage the Philippines, not only physically but through social media and so on. No?
Mhm.
After all, culture has already spilled out of its natural geographical confines. No? We now experience this deterritorialization of culture. No? But at the same time, I think it's important for you and for everyone else, I think, to be reflexive, for us to be aware where we're coming from and how we are positioned by our own personal histories, uh,
Mhm.
uh, rather than to be in search of that mythical essence, no? And to be, or to entertain that idea that we are to unwittingly privilege our own point of view, by assuming that somehow what we see is the truth, and that those who don't agree with us are not seeing it. It's important to be reflexive. No?
Mhm.
There's this philosopher I love to quote, Nietzsche. Nietzsche said, "There's no such thing as immaculate perception." Diba?
Yes.
You're always seeing things from some point of view, and I think it's important. No? If you are going to engage the mother country, home, the Philippines, from abroad, I think it's important for you to be self-aware about your location in the diaspora and how
Mhm.
that shapes your own views. No? Because people at home will probably entertain certain ideas about who you are, and sometimes you need to sort of
That's true.
critically engage that. No? So yon, no? To me, reflexivity is two things basically. One is, of course, uh, classic classic ethnography. One first step is always to be empathetic. No? To
Yes.
try to put yourself in other people's shoes, to be empathetic. But of course, that cannot be attained perfectly. I mean, unless you can find a way to put yourself inside another person's head, that's impossible.
Mhm.
No? At best, you
Mhm.
can probably do an approximation. No? But having said that, aside from empathy, then you need to be reflexive. We need to be reflexive. That for example, as being Filipino American, or somebody who lived in America for the longest time, returning to the Philippines, that we cannot just say that part of our life as in America is not shaping your views, is not shaping
My
your
views.
interests. Of course, it is. It's important
Mhm.
you know to be aware of that, so that you don't lose your way as well. And
Mhm.
you could always navigate the intricacies of everyday life in the Philippines. Yeah. So yeah, no? So basically two
Yeah.
steps: empathy and reflexivity.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. That's gonna. I'm always gonna remember that, and I'll come back to this video, Paul, to replay that back
Yeah.
whenever when I go back to the Philippines. Last question that I have, Paul. I've always wanted to ask this question. Did Rizal write sa aking mga kabata?
uh, that's apocryphal actually. We don't. There's basis for saying, there's enough basis for doubting actually that he wrote that. Um,
Mhm.
that's an early boyhood essay of his, right? Uh,
Yes,
so
opo, opo.
so yeah. So there's enough basis for actually doubting whether he actually wrote that. No? In
Mhm.
fact, even that phrase na yung sinasabi na ni Rizal, and it's quoted every time we celebrate buwan ng wika, di ba? Ang hindi
Hindi
marunong
magmahal.
magmahal sa sariling wika ay mahigit pa ang amoy sa malansang isda. I mean, there's even no real basis for claiming that Rizal said that. No? I mean, that's maraming ina-attribute kay Rizal kasi na hindi naman malinaw na siya talaga ang nagsabi, no? So
some says that he's too young for that. He was too young for it.
Yeah. But Rizal's life is one of the most well documented ever. And yet there are all these gaps, no? There are all these gaps. And I think that is something that we need to accept when you're studying people. There will always be that aspect of a person that you cannot gain access to, or in the case of historical persons who are no longer around, that there's always that aspect that you will never know because there's no documentation. And even if there's documentation, even if there's a diary like Rizal had his memorias, how reliable would those memorias be as recollections? Diba? Because if they were written many years later, they would inevitably have been shaped by his political exposure, right? I mean, for example, a lot of people don't realize that Rizal did not say anything critical about the friars before 1884. That all the anti-friar statements came after 1884. When Rizal left for Spain and became a liberal and eventually became a Mason. See? You can't find, an anti-friar statement earlier than that. Diba? In fact, this is a guy who had a very religious upbringing.
Yes. Opo.
Diba? Oh.
Wow. Sir, I have so much things to learn from you. I really do. I have a lot of questions, and see, we were hoping, me and Ma'am Andre was hoping that this is really just going to be a discussion more, but more question and answer because we have a lot of questions and we want to learn from you, po. That's mainly the reason why. One statement here from our audience po, sabi po ni Ma'am Nina. Sa ganang akin, and she's one of our learners here in Kapua. Sa ganang akin, mas mamahalin at magkakaroon ng malalim na pag-unawa sa buhay ni Rizal kung sariling dalumat wika natin ang gagamitin sa pagtuturo nito at ituro ang kaugnayan ng mga aral niya na nangyayari ngayon sa buhay natin, lalo na ang mga makabagong henerasyon.
Tama po 'yun, no? Pero si Rizal ay hindi rin simpleng tao, no? Una, kung totoo man yung sinabi niya na ang hindi marunong magmahal sa sariling wika ay higit pang amoy sa malansang isda. Huwag nating kalimutan na ang pinakamamahal na wika ni Rizal ay Kastila. At mahal din ni Rizal ang Aleman. He learned to speak German and his German was better than his English. Yeah. He also taught himself to speak English, by the way, no? And in his later life, of course, he was into Filipino. He was, in fact, itong orthographia na pinapalitan natin ang C ng K, kay Rizal yan. Siya ang may gawa niyan, no? There was that point in his life under the influence of German anthropologists. He was really quite interested in Philippine cultures, no? Okay, and he was imagining the Philippines as an historical community of language and culture, di ba? Culture nation, according to the Germans. That was a German influence, no? Pero yun nga, dapat intindihin natin, Rizal was a traveler. He journeyed far from home. He was transformed by that journey. And at one point in his life, he considered himself a loyal son of Spain.
Yeah. And for me po, with that quote, whether he wrote it or not, or whether he wrote it at a young age or not, I always look at it that there's definitely something that we should learn there in his statement, meaning like, we should also love our language, But that doesn't mean that since we are not speaking it, katulad po sa akin, being here, that doesn't mean that I don't love our language, because I do. In fact, that's my thesis. That's my thesis is on the Baybayin writing system. That's how much I love, because I want to focus more my attention to that. So yun, I mean, I think again it falls into that linear identity that many people are hoping for when they look at a person. But it should be more fluid, meaning
Yeah.
that, because we all have different ways. So we do change,
Yeah.
throughout time. But it's also important that John Rawls actually said this best when he talked about reflective equilibrium, wherein you reflect on something and you adjust. You reflect, for example, in our culture, we reflect on our culture and we adjust in
Yeah.
a way that would fit the situation
Yeah.
at that time.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's what we need to do.
Yeah. And
And
I and
that's
I
the
would I would
change.
I would I would take that as a note against as a warning against essentialism, di ba? Kasi identities are fluid.
Hmm.
We are constructs. We create ourselves. We engage in the process of self-making. And as a result of that, then therefore we are not made up of essences.
Hmm.
We are not really made up of essences. Our identities, in fact, have always been plural. Di ba? It's only easier to
Yes,
imagine that
opo.
now because of migration and the internet. No? But Daniel Miller reminds us that identities have always been plural.
Hmm.
It was just easier to maintain the myth of a single identity because people were trapped in the same time in the same place. You know, people didn't travel much and so on. But in the age of constant connectivity and hyperconnectivity and migration, identities become really, well, to use the term of these two guys who did research for Google, said identities are faceted. They are
Yes.
faceted.
Or sometimes, because people are dead to even explain themselves, like who they are.
Yeah.
We read them in a single book. For example, we read Paulo Coelho and we just think that, his identity. So for example, if you read The Alchemist, and wow, okay, that's how he is, that's how he think. But we forget about his other books. you
Yes.
know. Uh,
So
so I mean,
nagiging ano
those are
din, 'di
the things.
ba? May editing
Opo.
na nangyayari eh. May
Yes,
editing na
yes,
nangyayari.
yes. There are things that your ideas to change. Tama nga po kayo. You look at your diary from the past and then see how much you changed
Yeah.
until you came to our time. Sir, thank you so much. This is actually one of the most productive. Ma'am Andre, do you have any other comments? Well, I'm sorry, Ma'am Andre. I tried to read as much questions that you have. I was reading your question already. Oh, hold on. Let me just unmute you. Oh, I can unmute. You have to unmute it, Ma'am Andre.
Okay.
There we
Actually,
go.
marami akong natutunan sa inyong dalawa. Marami, parang nasa loob lang ako ng classroom ni Sir Clem nung college. Parang bumabalik yung alaala. At nasa classroom tayo ng Baybayin 101. Marami akong na-learn about, ah, ma, sa akin palagay sa mga sinasabi niyo, okay rin yung linearity ng history, pero marami nang bago sa kasaysayan na dapat nating, yung sinasabi nga ni Sir Clement na historical reconstruction, hindi tayo sa akin, hindi natin binabawasan or binabawasan yung history, pero maraming interpretation na hindi dapat nalilimita lang sa isang perspektibo lang. So
Mhm.
as a teacher of history po, nasa high school, siguro po yung role ko po is ipakita sa lahat, pero hindi rin miski sa mga college na professors, hindi lang po iisang perspektibo, ipakita natin sa mga estudyante natin na dapat maging bukas sila sa ideya tungkol kay Rizal, na hindi lang kasabi nga ni Sir Alan na pag ganito yung sinasabi ni Rizal, hindi ito lang yung sa puntong ito yung kanyang sinasabi. Meron pa din siyang iba pang na mga idea na kay Rizal din. At in terms of kanina po sa reconstruction ni Rizal, may maiaambag na din ako ng mga discussion dahil kay Sir Clement na ganun pala yung sinasabi ni Rizal about Rizal's reconstruction sa history. Yun po. At maraming salamat, Sir Clem, sa mga dagdag na kaalaman na naranasan ko ngayong araw na ito. At hoping na lahat ng mga guro sa kasaysayan or sa political science ay bago ng kanilang pananaw tungkol sa history at sa ating culture. Na I believe culture is not static but culture is dynamic. Yun po. At sa mga kapwa ko guro na nanonood o manunood pa, ito po yung Kultura Code ngayong araw for Sir Clement Camposano's lecture. It's Kultura Code KC 555. Again, KC 555. Go to riverboystudios.com, go to links and events, key in your answers to those surveys, key in the Kultura Code so that you can get your certificates from Riverboy Studios Academy of Professional Education po. At saka po, incoming events of Kultura will be a lecture with Sir Paulo Heras. And at the end of the month, may bago tayong schedule po ng Dokyo Komentaryo. It will be on a Sunday, June 26 at 7 p.m. in the evening, featuring po isang ethno group in the Philippines. Sana po you should watch it para magkaroon po kayo ng idea kung ano po yung sinasabi namin tungkol sa Dokyo Komentaryo. So that will be po Badyaws of Tawi-Tawi. So again, that will be for a new schedule this month lang po. June 26, Sunday po, 7 p.m. Yan lang po.
Yes.
Salamat po.
Sir Clement. Opo, Sir Clem, I actually added you in Facebook. I hope you can accept my friend request on Facebook. I also sent you a comment, and it's a video that I created in my my assignment po at Harvard, and I hope that I'm really hoping for your comment on that. If you can watch it po and give me your feedback on that video.
We'll try.
Yes.
Yung puno kasi yung yung I have to clean up my friends list kasi nag-over na ako doon sa anon. So maglilinis muna ako so I can accept more friends.
Yes,
Maraming
sir.
mga inactive na accounts, so I can accept you. Sige.
I appreciate that po, sir. If you if I could be your friend on Facebook.
And hopefully, if I get a chance to visit the US, then pwede naman tayo magkita.
Yes. I'll take you around here po. Please come here to Washington, D.C. po, sir. I'll take you around. I'll take you around po here.
Last time I was there, I gave a lecture at UCLA. So hopefully, I can also do that the other side of the US.
Yes, or maybe kwan po. And I'm actually planning a linguistic presentation there at Harvard. If we can invite you there po one of these days, because I wanted to bring the Doctrina Christiana there. It's also my plan, because nandito lang po siya sa Library of Congress yung Doctrina Christiana, and we want to bring it to Harvard to do a presentation. So maybe I could invite you in that event someday po.
Sige.
And I really hope to see you in person po, sir.
Sige. Yeah. And if you visit Iloilo, just let us know. If our schedules will allow, then we can host you here at U.P Visayas.
Yes, po, sir. That would be a great honor. It'd be a great honor for me to be there. To even teach beside you po, sir, that would be a great honor for me.
Sure.
Yes po. Salamat talaga, Sir Clem.
Okay. Sige.
Uulitin.
Yes.
All right.
Maraming salamat po. Maraming salamat po. Looking forward to more activities like this po. Maraming salamat po, sir.
Thank you. And yes, I look forward to engaging you again.
Yung certificate nyo po sa email nyo na lang po. Salamat.
Yes, please. Sa OC na lang.
Yes po.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you
po.
All right. Okay.
Good morning from here in Washington D.C. po. There, I believe it's good afternoon already.
Yes.
Thank you po.
All right.
Bye.
Lunch po.